Happy to be in St. Petersburg to talk about the courage of things. We live in a world in which new technologies seem to be the excuse to improve and take the world farther. Nobody knows exactly where, but farther, but next, well, the conference is called the .next, but in the name there is the dot, which is a period. Stop, we are here now, we'll look into the next. But to really look into the next, the message of this presentation, this particular keynote, which is a little bit of inspirational and a little bit technical. I'm not going to open up Visual Studio, IntelliJ, or any other editor. I'm not going to show code, but I'm going to talk also about specific technologies, patterns, and things that, technically speaking, are relevant to developers. But the key point is the courage of doing things, of learning how to do things, and just knowing things versus being a geek. I mean, we live in a time, okay, just to be explicit, I'm not that happy, personally, so just speaking for myself, about the new things coming up in the Microsoft space called vNext, this, that. It seems to me that this kind of things are a lot more relevant to Microsoft than to developers. But there is something good there, and I will talk about these kind of things. But the message is, and I use the ASP.NET5 vNext kind of thing as an example, I'm not so sure that everybody in the industry needs the things that someone tries to sell as so important, crucial, vital. I know, and I think most of you know how to write, how to build websites that more or less work. And the problem we have, the courage of knowing how to do things in the real world and for the real customers who pay, that's important, is essentially how to match business, how to match real world needs from the real world with software tricks. The way in which we match these two needs, that's far more important, as I say things, that knowing that the main problem in the world is replacing system.web, which makes ASP.NET websites slow, so they say. So I invite you to start your thinking from this sentence. Listen, dear, in your life, always manage to learn a trade, how to do things, and possibly all of its tricks. Who said that? My grandma. And my grandma told that, she was a farmer, so not a scientist, not Nobel Prize winner, just a plain farmer. And she told me that several thousand times when I was a kid, and then when I grew up, and then at some point she, like every other thing in this world, passed away. So learn how to do a trade and possibly all of its tricks. Internet of geeks. Oh, there is Internet of Things. I also had a slide, Internet of Things, but apparently, Internet of Things what? But I started from Internet of Things because if you go on Wikipedia and read the definition, what is considered by Wikipedia the official definition of Internet of Things, you read something like that I paraphrased to Internet of Geeks. It's a scenario in which developers, fanboys, experts, are provided with early content, nightly builds, and early content, and the ability to access builds over a network without requiring human-to-human or human-to-computer interaction. So you want to feel cool? Come my way. Come on, I'll give you access to nightly builds as generated by my continuous integration server. And you can install on your F.G machine, virtual machines, every result that comes out of this nightly build, and you can play and then complain that it doesn't work. This is the Internet of Geeks. How not to do things. And the courage of things, instead, is a mix in which developers learn to do things and don't commit themselves to solve problems that experts told they're going to have. So I'm an expert. So I come your way and say, look, I'm sure, because I know things. Because I'm constantly working on nightly builds that don't work, and I know things, and I tell you that you're going to have a problem in the future. And to solve the problems you don't know you have, there are some new fancy technologies using which is a problem. So it's a very convoluted kind of world in which we live, and it's gonna get worse and worse every day. And to stop this kind of trend, I would say stop and just think of how we can do things. And now, concretely, here is event sourcing. Now I turn a little bit more technical. Event sourcing is an approach to software design that has been around for at least 30 years. If we look, not under this name, it was unnamed. It's an approach to software design that went unnamed for about 30 or even 40 years, since the very beginning of software engineering. If you think of software that banks, industries, insurances, the pillars of our society that move around a lot of money and make the world, version 1 of the world, running, they have been using what today we call event sourcing for decades. So the question, Dino, how much event sourcing do you do? What? I have no idea of what event sourcing is, but let me read Wikipedia or around that. And it says, event sourcing is essentially when systems are built to track what happens in the business domain. And this is precisely the way in which mainframes, and far before SQL databases, have been used. But if you have a chance to look or study how SQL Server databases and SQL Server Oracle relational databases actually work internally, all they do is tracking what happens event by event. This is about event sourcing. So use events, business events, what happens, the serialization, the description, the formalization of a single individual business event, using that piece of information as the data source. Look, this is apparently a nice idea, but it also seems so far away from what we did, what we have done so far and what we do today. But actually, when we create a database and we store and read information in a database, what we do actually is updating for each insert, each deletion, each update we perform. All we do is that we update the current snapshot that represents the state of the system. So we have like taking a picture, we take a picture of the current state of the system, and every change changes the picture. So at the end of the day, we are perfectly able to know exactly what exactly is the state of the system now. But what it was a minute ago often is lost forever, unless you operate in a business domain, banking, for example, in which tracking what was the state of the system 2 minutes ago an hour ago, a week before, is important and critical. In which case, you find a way, the best you can, to keep track of the list of events. And this is precisely what in mainframes and in the implementation of relational databases has been done by architects for years. Now we call this event sourcing. So, gosh, I've been doing event sourcing and I didn't know. But now, in the future, I would say that thinking of events as the primary source, the primary way of storing the state of a system becomes more and more important, even in CRUD systems. Create, read, update, delete. So in what we consider typically as developers the simplest way of writing a system. Oh, it's plain CRUD. Don't worry. We can hire a junior developer and put it there, write the system. It's just, read, write, update, delete, blah, blah, blah. It's easy, trivial. But what if? Okay, I have one of these systems. A customer of mine has a system, and version 1 of this system has been working for 5 years now. It's perfectly working. But now they asked me, we would like to navigate back through the pages of the system to see what was the list of blah, 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 blah 3 months ago. Oh my God. 3 months ago. It's not just like given the specific mechanics of the system, it was not like making a query 3 months ago. Because in particular, it was a booking system. And in the booking system, rules that you use, that have to be used. For example, let's exemplify. Say you have a system to book meeting rooms. Each room is identified, has a set of rules. So this room can be booked weekdays from 9 to, 13, 9 to 15, and for no longer than 1 hour. And you have this rule, but this rule may change over time. So from the 1st of January to the 1st of June, you can book for no longer than 30 minutes. But this changes in the summertime. So whenever the rule changes, you just update the record in some database that tells you what is the configuration for booking that meeting room. And that's okay, as long as you have to work with the grid to make, in the future, bookings, it's okay. If you want to see what has been booked, but just bookings, a customer, whatever, booked the room, employee, whatever, booked the room from time to time, that's okay. But if you want to page through the grid to see what was the situation, what was the grid 3 months ago, you need to know what were the rule of booking the room 3 months ago, and you don't have that. So, I'm just missing a couple of, a date or a couple of numbers somewhere. It's a lot more, actually. Yeah, and you can probably, when this problem starts coming up, you have, concretely you miss a few numbers, a few small pieces of information. But to manage these little missing pieces of information effectively, you probably need to re-architect the system. And this is the big kind of thing that event sourcing brings up. I'm not saying you have to switch to event sourcing, which means using probably or considering different types of databases. I'm not saying that, but reasoning in terms of event sourcing, because it suffices that the customer wants to do some business intelligence in-house, and you're stuck. Even on the silliest CRUD system, you start having the need of processing events and keeping track of events. So this is a lot more important. And if you live in a world in which you need to do things and not just go catching fancy technologies, this is important. So, something new. Common Sense 2.0. A new product available for Mac and Linux as well. That is very, very much needed. And of course, it's open source. It's fully testable. It's cross-platform. Common sense is everywhere. Runs everywhere, any platform. It's scalable for the cloud, and it's fast and small. So let's now switch back. Windows Forms, Web Forms, Silverlight, just to stay in the Microsoft realm, are dead technologies, according to pundits. No longer Windows Forms. Web Forms, what? MVC, or even better, MVC over the new DNX runtime. Silverlight. Silverlight. I remember. I mean, you know, there's a conference, a popular conference run in Norway, I think next week, NDC in Oslo. I was there the first time they launched the conference in 2008. They paid me a lot of money. And they asked me to give us, for the huge amount of money we pay you, give us the best talks for the future of developers. And I spent an entire day talking Silverlight. They didn't want me to speak anymore. I was never invited anymore to speak at that conference. So, Silverlight. Yes, but yet I have a customer, and this customer provides software that costs $1 million to companies like Gazprom. Well, probably not, I don't know if Gazprom is a customer, but that size of that, and that type of companies are exactly energy companies, are the customer, the buyers of this software, and it's entirely Silverlight based. They have a huge problem now, what to do in the next few years, because rewriting the entire UI, which is a monitoring system, in HTML5, well, can be a nightmare. The infrastructure, the part of the system that produces data, no big deal. It's, you know, it's back end. But the UI at the moment is entirely based on Silverlight. Yet, companies like of the size of Gazprom depend on this system. So can we call Silverlight a dead technology? For sure, Silverlight is not going to be updated anymore. Same for Web Forms, same for Windows Forms. Who cares? Works today? Fine. This is the courage of doing things. But at the same time, the courage of doing things is looking at ways, proven ways to solve problems that still let customers do things without what sometimes is called a programmed obsolescence, so that, you know, wash machines stop working after 3 years because you have to buy a new version. Obsolescence 2.0 is the new product in this industry. Also available for Mac and Linux, open source, fully testable, cross-platform, scalable for the cloud, and fast and small. My grandma, I love that person, told, well, you don't have a problem. When she saw me to be particularly concerned as a teenager, probably with girlfriends or this kind of things, so, well, look, well, your girlfriend, you know, told you anything. She still probably loves you, so don't worry. Wait for her to say, I don't love you anymore. So wait to have a problem before you look for a solution. Remember, probably in the past century, there were something called the traveling shows. Today we call TV shows, but, you know, sort of the same idea. They were now coming to, like circus, coming to a town, offered various entertainments, and in the meanwhile, weird medicines like elixirs of life, natural remedies, fantastical oddities, contraptions were sold to, just give me your money and then get this back for a few months, for a few money, and who cares if it works or not? Just, you know, TV shows of today, traveling shows in the past century. The courage of things is not because something is touted as the next big thing. It means that it will work for you. It's an important point JavaScript. Everybody knows JavaScript. Apparently, the world is, it wouldn't be the same without JavaScript. But is JavaScript so powerful? Maybe or not. Angular, microservices, functional languages, NoSQL. These are all things that may or may not work. But they are, to some extent, touted as the next big thing you look into. And apparently, if you are not doing any JavaScript or any Angular or any NoSQL, you are missing the point of software development today. There are definitely scenarios in which NoSQL is helpful, sure. There are scenarios in which Angular or JavaScript help, but or functional languages. So taken individually, each of these things can be helpful, and they for sure helped solving real issues in the real world, but in context. So what I see today, and I try to address with the slogan, the courage of just doing things that work, is the fact that we tend to turn something that works for us in a particular context should work for everybody. And the fact that we are given, sometimes pundits, experts, are given a stage to talk to people, whether at conference or maybe articles or blogs or interviews or I don't know exactly what, makes us so powerful to feel the right of telling you what to do. I know I have seen things that you humans will never know, like Blade Runner. JavaScript, Angular, microservice, all these kind of things are just ways to solve problems. But the very, very important thing is knowing the problem you are going to solve and knowing the problems your customers are going to have and call you to solve. There are exceptions. Some things are important, but probably are not always technologies. They have more to do with approaches to solving problems. So things like domain-driven design, or CQRS, or user experience, or messages, or design for the cloud. These are things that barely map one-to-one to a framework. You cannot install on a customer site a product called DDD in much the same way you cannot install a product called Common Sense 2.0. But domain-driven design is critical, and it's also misunderstood. Domain-driven design, it was introduced, as you probably remember, some 10 years ago, and it was misunderstood for a long time, and the first and the most important person who misunderstood it was the author, Eric Evans. He did a great, fantastic job when, thinking and formalizing domain-driven design, but he himself missed for a few years the real point of domain-driven design. It was only back in 2009, 5 years later, that it was a conference in London, that he said, what I have learned about DDD in 5 years, and he said, well, the real point of domain-driven design is not the domain model, is not having objects to represent the universe, but it's what I have called in the book strategic design. So today you can do, and you must do, domain-driven design in any application, and it has a lot more to do with processing requirements than it has with building software. So the real point of domain-driven design is analysis, is building something called the ubiquitous language, so the universal language for that business, so that in first place, everybody involved in the project speaks the same language. Okay, if you think, and probably some of you are thinking this, maybe unconfessed, but you are thinking, it's obvious that we have to speak the same language. This is trivial to say. Well, I have a direct experience of an architect we hired who actually recreated the universe because he was a DDD fanatic. He recreated, instead of learning the business he was called to write software for, and instead of using the names of the business, he recreated the universe. So it delivered an application that works. Works, nothing to say, it works, period. Except that it completely uses different processes. Different name, calls things with different names, and people in the business, people, not architects, right? Operators are confused now because they have to learn how to do things in a slightly different way and calling things in with different names. The result is that now, when there are conversations over the phone, they use a word, and they, but with this word, I mean this. So they feel the need of specifying what they really mean with the word, because it's not the word of business, but it's the word, it's not the word of software, but it's the word of business. And the conflict is, this kind of conflict is precisely what the ubiquitous language pattern in domain-driven design is all about. So there is something really, really important in domain-driven design, but has nothing to do with the common perception of it, which is having a domain, an object-oriented model that covers the entire domain. That's a thing of the past, I would say. And CQRS is precisely the new way out. CQRS is not even a pattern. It's a simple, very simple principle that says command and queries are distinct, period. Are distinct things. You create a stack for commands, for actions that alter the state of the system, and a separate stack for queries. No big deal. Okay. Why should I? If you have distinct parts, distinct stacks, the event sourcing kind of thing comes far easier because you perform a command and save whatever piece of information is relevant to save the state of the system at that moment in time. And when you have done, you can synchronize, or through a synchronous action or an asynchronous action, depends on the performance you expect to have, with the database that you only use for reading. So you save in one way and you expose it in another way through some sort of synchronization. So you have distinct parts of the system that can be optimized and even deployed separately. If you decide that you need more or less information to save on the command, you can do that and have the mathematical guarantee that it won't affect the read part of the system. User experience. Okay, I'm not an expert in UX, so I don't know which are the patterns or whether users want to use touch or what is the point of touch. I would say that one of the problems in software that makes software so expensive, projects, is that you deliver a prototype, you deliver the first version of the system, and users don't like it, or users start using that to figure out that it's the UI, the experience that end users mature on the system is not what they were looking for. So, in a scenario in which there is more agility in the presentation layer and you present wireframes, mock-ups to users and build storyboards without having the system in the back, which is sort of a kind of different way of building systems. I call this UX-driven design. It's too long to be explained in just a few minutes, but if you're interested, feel free to stop me after the talk. And that is another aspect to take into account. Messages. You remember how Windows worked and probably still works. The windows and messages being exchanged between windows. If you, sometimes, some people here maybe even remember, for sure Michael may remember. Where's Michael? He's not here. Okay, anyway. Michael, because he's the oldest. May remember the WM underscore something, the code for messages that Windows, in Windows 3 point something, were exchanging. Messages are incredibly powerful because they are immutable and they can be repeated every time. And you can repeat a sequence of action by resending messages. So the workflows that every software has expressed through messages instead of sequences of actions give you an incredible amount of flexibility in the design of business logic, especially when the business logic is frequently changing. And cloud design, that's all about scalability. Another piece of wisdom from my grandma is that if you don't know things, how to do things, and you have to, that's the ideal situation. What? She would say to me, look, Dino, do this. Grandma, I have no idea how to do that. You have a brain, use it. And when you don't know how to do things, but you have a brain, you look into things, and all you do is all you think is reasonable to do without being biased in any way. Knowing things, being an expert, having read things, adds bias. And either you are really an expert that can make sense of all the amount of information you receive, or it's better to not know anything, but still be smart and try doing things. So, cloud design, I don't call myself an expert in scalability, even though I'm going to have here in the afternoon today a talk about common scalability practices that may work. But I always used a couple of principles in the architecture of my websites. And apparently, keeping things as simple as possible. In Italian, we have an expression that says, I don't know how to read, I don't know how to write, but I do things. And we use, well, I know nothing, but I do. And I know nothing, but I do is, I do things the best I think they should be done without being biased by existing knowledge of things. So either the level of knowledge is high enough to make you a real expert, or probably it's better ignore completely, forget about what you may know, and just look at things and try doing things to make them work. So cloud design today, and we have books on that, is about keeping things stateless, small, fast, compact. Simple. Because now, in a cloud scenario, Control-C, Control-V of instances duplicate web roles. Okay, it's called web roles in the Azure jargon, and that gives you more or less power of running things. But it works only if you don't think, oh, how can I make a system scalable? Make the system compact, simple, stateless, and scalability comes automatically. So, design driven by the domain. Okay, it's DDD. Well, it's revisiting DDD. Domain-driven design is design of the system driven by the needs of the domain. Apparently, it's just rewording the acronym, but it gives, put this way, a completely different perspective of the thing. Design driven by the user experience, which has nothing to do with colors, rounded borders, fashion. It just has to do with user experience, the experience of users using your software. When users use a software, depending on how the software requires interaction, users go through an experience. You want this experience to be as pleasant as possible. So the content of screens, the storyboards that result from combination, concatenation of screens. That's all about the user experience, and this is an architectural concern. It's not for graphic people. Behavior-driven implementation, tasks. We write software for some people to use the software to perform their own everyday work. And the everyday work of most people is tasks, executing tasks. Software should go after these tasks. Message-driven business logic. This is the final step. Because if you start thinking in terms of tasks, tasks are actions, and each action may generate an event, and there are reactions to these events. So the message-driven business logic expressing workflows in terms of commands and events seems to be a really important thing. It's the 4 points on these slides are suggestions on how to do things, even though there is no fancy technology behind this. And now, just to expand a little bit more on the points, this is a scenario at work, people at work trying to define the ubiquitous language. So there is a bunch of people on a table, developers, people who are used to use expressions like, we delete the booking, we submit the order, we update the job order, create the invoice, blah, blah, blah. And there are other people, the customer, that probably will call delete the booking, cancel the booking. It's the business term. Or check out is what we call, as developers, submit the order. Or maybe extend the job order instead of update. Accept the invoice or register the invoice, not create. Invoices in the real world are accepted, registered. They are not created. We developers create invoices, not customers in the real world. And context map is another fancy term, DDD related, that can be summarized as the diagram that provides a comprehensive view of the system being designed. So the output of domain-driven design is not an object-oriented model, but a top-level architecture in which we identify contexts and relationships between these contexts. We can have, for example, in a website, in an application that simulates the behavior of a sporting club site, we can have the core domain, the back office, the front end, and maybe external services to get weather forecasts or I don't know exactly what. And you see, and this is just DDD terminology, customer, supplier, partner, conformist type of relationships. This is the output you should get out of domain-driven design. And then each of these bubbles represent a part of the system to implement. You can use for each of those any pattern. Each of those can be a layer, the system itself can be a standalone website, or it can be a DLL, an assembly that is combined with others to form, maybe back office and core domain could be the same and be themselves an application, a microservice, or maybe a website, or maybe a Windows service, or whatever you want. But this is the context map, is the map of business context that results from the analysis. And this is good to have regardless of the way in which you implement code, and this is invaluable. UX-driven design. Now, it's self-explaining. My mom uses this one. But we've got the other one from the pay TV. We have a nice user interface versus a nice user experience. In terms of software, it means that we have a presentation layer and a black box. And what I have called design driven by user experience at the end of the day is, First, decide in agreement with the user what you want to expose. What is the right experience, right for the end users. And then, once you have decided the number of buttons, the number of UI triggers that may start operations in the back end, you have the content for the arrows, what comes out of a screen and what comes back into a screen. And given those endpoints, build a black box. Whatever else you build is a black box. It doesn't matter. But if you have the agreement on screens, most of the troubles you may face once you release the software are solved almost forever. Message-based business logic. The user interface, any of those buttons in the presentation layer, one clicked, should start an action, should start a workflow, right? And typically, when the button is pushed, you start writing and running through a workflow, a sequence of actions, if, a step-by-step procedure. What if instead you start by placing a command to a bus? A command is just the input data. In the bus, you have some infrastructure that gets the command and processes that. The bus knows where is the handler for that command type. And the bus, looking at the type of the command and the content, passes that data transfer object to a processor. The processor does its job, and it's step one. And after that, it may place a request for another command or just fire an event to the bus. What I have called sagas and handlers are terminology for command handlers. A saga is a long-running process. A handler is a one-off executor of tasks. But they are the same kind. They process commands. So the bus receives a message and calls into any of those registered sagas or handlers. The bus, from the UI or from the output of handlers or sagas, may have an event pushed back on the bus. And an event may be saved if you need to track events, or maybe become a notification to other handlers. So an order has been created. Who's interested? And registered handlers kick in and perform that. At the end of the day, once you have built the infrastructure for buses, sagas, and handlers, which essentially is a DLL with a relatively standard code just to start experimenting with, or commercial products like N-Service Bus, for example. Once you have this in place, the flexibility of rendering and updating your business logic and extending your business logic becomes a lot higher than it is today. CQRS, command and queries, distinct things. A command alters the state of the system and doesn't return data. A query returns data and doesn't alter the state of the system. Distinct things. It was something that Bertrand Meyer called command query separation already back in the 80s. So what is the difference between command query separation, the principle, and CQRS? CQRS is the same principle applied not to classes but to the architecture. Same concept, applied to the system architecture, which moves from a canonical layered architecture to something similar, except that we have a domain layer, the place where business logic is mostly implemented, that lives in the command stack and possibly is missing unless you really need it in the query stack. And the query stack can simply be just plain queries. And to finish off, and trying to reinforce my points about the courage of doing things, a couple of tweets. The days are long, but the decades are short, unless you're writing JavaScript, in which case both days and decades are none. And from the same guy, another one which is a lot more funny. We spent 18 months migrating from a monolith to microservices, and result are GitHub gets paid for more private repos. And find replays is just harder. Yeah. Sometimes I think that we just live to make GitHub make money. And I wonder, really, if you know the theory of plots all over the world, why we need microservices. Maybe it's a maneuver in the dark, organized by GitHub to have people pay more for having more private repos. Sometimes I just wonder that. And I'm so happy to see that this guy, this popular guy on Twitter, just wrote that a week ago. Okay, to finish off, a couple of minutes, ASP.NET 5 now. Apparently, system web, the reason why we need ASP.NET 5 is because system web is the root of all evil. This is what they're trying to convince us about. And they say something like, the key point of the new ASP.NET is the ability to host on IIS, built-in support for dependency injection, oh, I live for that, integrated support for creating and using NuGet packages, which is the new DLL hell, and this is serious hell. Any memory you may have of the past, the DLL hell is nothing, really nothing compared to the NuGet hell. Another key thing is a single aligned web stack for web UI and web APIs. I always thought that the web API was the most stupid thing ever done. So that they unify web API and MVC is not a cool new feature, it's fixing a stupid mistake. Okay, my opinion. New tooling that simplifies modern web development, right. Built on .NET Core, and nobody knows what it is, which supports true side-by-side app versioning, hopefully, and run cross-platform on Windows, Mac, and Linux. Okay, what's for business here? Now tell me, help me. Is there anything here that has to do, okay, I write websites, what's in it for me? I mean, the list, you can say, Dino, oh, look, yeah, no. You're unfair because you created this list just to justify your points. No. This comes from the ASP.NET website. It's Scott Guthrie. I just cut and paste from the Scott Guthrie introduction article on ASP.NET 5. This is not my points. These are Microsoft's points about ASP.NET 5. So, as I read things, business-wise, there is nothing. Just nothing. So, to quote once more my grandma, if you really find in your specific context that system web is your problem, it's not my problem, but if it is your problem, then probably, what's this? Okay, then probably ASP.NET 5 makes sense. But today, screenshot from docs.asp.net, the documentation. Apparently say, wow, they're doing a very fantastic job. But the job continues, and the symbol, this symbol, means documentation not here yet. So, there's nothing there, except installing on Windows, Mac OS, and Linux. That's the only part of documentation we have. The screenshot was taken 2 days ago, unless they deployed last night. This is right. This screen is absolutely right. Okay, in summary, the landscape is ASP.NET today running on system web and the existing HTTP runtime pipeline. And then we have ASP.NET5, which uses a completely different, new, maybe smarter HTTP runtime DNX. And the ASP.NET5, this new flavor, can be run on 3 different versions of the .NET framework. And you choose which one you prefer. So it can be the full .NET framework, the .NET Core, which is a super optimized version, they call super optimized to make it cool. It's a completely different version of the .NET framework. Okay, smaller, but with a different set of classes, where you miss things and you have new things. So you have to learn a completely new language, okay? The .NET Core, and then the .NET Core for cross-platform development that runs unchanged on Mac and Linux when it will be available, and nobody knows when. In the end, as I read this landscape, okay, business as usual. Bow, like dogs were bow, 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 bow. Dogs barking, bow, 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 bow. But BAU, business as usual. In Italian, when we render, I don't know in other languages, but in Italian, when we render the barking of a dog, we say BAU, business as usual. So unless system web is your real problem, I'm not so sure that ASP.NET is giving you some common sense as a service. That's all. Thank you very much for your time. I'll be around, so feel free to stop me and ask questions, and if you don't mind, follow me. Thank you.